So Wharton School is the business school of the University of Pennsylvania. It is one of the nation's top business schools, and the fact that I am at an elite R1 institution is probably going to become quite clear with some of the things that I have to say in a little bit. Wharton has 4 degree programs. We have about 5,000 students in total. About 2,600 of them are undergrads, and about 1,800 are MBA students. That's the flagship degree program. If you know anything about Wharton, that's probably the thing that you're familiar with. We also have about 450 or so executive MBA students and about 200 PhD students. So about 5,000 students in total, but about every semester, about 7,000 students take Wharton courses. So we've got about 2,000 students each semester who enroll in courses from other parts of the University of Pennsylvania. Our classes, like many places, were remote all throughout 2020 and in the spring semester of 2021, with a return to campus only happening in the fall of 2021, and sort of a full return to campus this semester. Most of our courses are taught in person, but a growing number of courses, especially in our MBA programs, are taught in an online format. So a little bit more about where I'm situated. The IDEA courseware team, which I am part of, is part of the broader IDEA team within Wharton Computing. So my role is located within an IT organization. The IDEA team stands for Instructional Designers and Educational Architects, and the senior director responsible for our group likes to say that we design both the physical and virtual learning spaces for the Wharton School. The other groups within IDEA include, am I still connected? Can someone please?
Yep, I still hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I had yet another instance of kitten chaos, and they had actually disconnected my laptop from my external monitor. They are usually much better behaved than what is happening right now. And I am so sorry about this. I am really trying to figure out where I am. All of my notes have now gone. So I'm gonna just try to wing what I've got here. They have totally upset the apple cart, as it were. Oh my Lord. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen until I can get this recovered. Give me 1 second here.
I'll go ahead and pause the
Thank
recording.
you so much. So thank you again, everyone, for your patience as we sort of dealt with that little catastrophe. So IDEA stands for Instructional Designers and Educational Architects, and the senior director responsible for this group likes to say that we're responsible for both the virtual and the physical learning spaces. The other teams within IDEA include the Alfred West Junior Learning Lab. So they handle our learning simulations. Many of them are homegrown, some of them are licensed from other organizations. Our digital services team, which is a video production team, and then systems and processes. And what they're responsible for is figuring out that's supposed to say technology in teaching spaces. So they do the technology in our learning classrooms. They are responsible for developing the technology that's used on the podium and speccing that out. And as we've begun developing teaching spaces for remote teaching, they've been heavily involved in speccing out those spaces as well. And we have several SAIL classrooms, and I'll talk a little bit about those a little bit shortly. And they developed they specced out the technology that we use in those learning spaces too. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, now that we're past all the kitten catastrophe, is we're going to talk a little bit about barriers to student learning. We're going to talk a little bit about what inclusive course design is, some considerations for inclusive course design. I'm going to talk briefly about one course that I was heavily involved in developing and how we incorporated many of these inclusive course design principles in it. And then we're going to work a little bit together on a collaborative idea generation and discussion. And since we lost some time here because of the kittens, I'm going to probably skip through some things that are a little bit less important.
And also, I don't know if you want to share your screen now. Or
oh,
not,
I'm not sharing my screen again. So let me do that. Thank you for letting me know that
Sure.
was not yet happening. Okay,
There you
so
go.
So there's an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And I really, again, appreciate everyone's good humor with all of this. So where I want to start is talking a little bit about barriers to student learning. So a core goal of universal design for learning is to anticipate and reduce the obstacles that may impede student learning. 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, this task has really only gotten more challenging. And one of the ways that universal design for learning has approached this is through considering learner variability and how that influences student experiences. Now, every institution has a different population of learners, but I want to just think just a tiny bit about what we mean by learner variability by thinking about the range of learners that we have at the Wharton School. So we can begin to get a sense of what we mean by learner variability just by looking at this population. So I've got here the profiles of our first year students in both our Wharton undergraduate program and our MBA program. In total, we have about 2,600 undergraduates, and the profile of this year's first year students is really representative of what we've seen in the past. More than 60% of our incoming students who are US citizens or permanent residents identify as students of color. Almost a quarter of the students in our incoming class are international, 12% are first generation. When we look at the profile of our MBA students, we see a similar diversity of backgrounds and experiences. We have almost 1,800 MBA students in total. And for this year, we have a new milestone, which in our first year class, more than 50% of the students identify as female. And that is really exciting to see this shift happening within our MBA population. Our students come from more than 80 countries. More than a third of the population are international students, and 7% identify as LGBTQ+. And the Wharton School is a business school at an Ivy League university. Our students come from different backgrounds. They speak a variety of languages, and they bring with them a rich diversity of cultural and educational experiences. So even in this elite or institution where some might expect a more homogeneous student population, we see a really diverse student background. But this really only begins to tell the story about learner variability when we consider higher education more broadly. So when we think about learner variability, there are a couple of factors that influence our students' ability to participate and to complete coursework. So according to pre-pandemic statistics, about 1 in 4 adults in the United States live with a disability. Many of the disabilities that our students experience are not visible, and thus many are not documented, and many students don't have accommodations for those. First generation students may not be as prepared to navigate the really complex and idiosyncratic university settings. Many of our students, even at a place like Penn, have work obligations and family and caregiving obligations that they're trying to balance. And we've seen these issues just really intensify over the past couple of years of the pandemic. And as we've learned really acutely during this time, broadband access at home varies considerably depending on the geographic region and our students' socioeconomic status. And these hint at some really long-standing barriers to learning. These barriers can take a lot of forms, and prior to the pandemic, many of these barriers emerged really in terms of thinking about these barriers emerge in terms of thinking about the selection of course materials or students' preparedness for those materials. And we can see this in this list here in terms of like lack of background knowledge, sometimes confusions about the next steps, coursework that isn't culturally relevant to them. So there can be a lot of different varieties of barriers here. When we look at more recently, the kinds of barriers that we see our students facing now, 2 years into the pandemic. Hold on, and my slide is not. Okay, there, finally advanced. When we look at what we're seeing now, we're seeing a huge disconnection in our students, which forms a really significant barrier. Last week, Beth McCurtry published an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that describes what she calls the stunning level of disconnection that students are experiencing right now. And this plays a role in our students' ability to learn. We see pandemic-related trauma across our student body. We see burnout from a prolonged experience of shifting expectations and experiences. We see students experiencing trauma from illness, death, and loss of people around them, and increased social anxiety. We see higher amounts of both financial security and housing and food insecurity at students at every level, even at places like Penn. And so when we think about the barriers that exist to learning now, there are many, they're varied, and they are problematic, and they're really difficult for us to navigate. Now, I was going to have you, I was going to ask you to share some of the barriers to learning that your students experience in our shared Google Doc, and I'm going to put the link to that Google Doc. I'm going to put the link to that Google Doc into the chat, and you're welcome to contribute to that now, but we're going to come back to this at the very end of the presentation because of the time loss that we had initially. I want to move ahead and we'll come back and look at some of what you had to share when we get to the very end. So inclusive course design is really intended to help reduce some of these barriers. And as I said, we've got barriers that take a wide range of forms, barriers that we're well experienced in seeing among our students, but also these new ones that faculty, staff, instructional designers at every level in higher education are having a lot more, many more challenges navigating and countering. But one of the ways that we can do this is through really thoughtful course design. In this, what I'm going to have to say is sort of a little bit, it's not specifically about sort of post-pandemic inclusive learning strategies or inclusive course design strategies, but it does take that into consideration. Inclusive learning really is intended to help to foster inclusive learning. And many educational institutions now are focusing a lot of effort on fostering diversity in learning and teaching and in research. We recognize that it's a better situation for all of us when faculty, students, and staff increasingly reflect the richness of human identity and thought. And when we see this kind of diversity happening, we see that we always see this first in our students, right? We see demographic shifts happening in our students long before we ever see them happening among our faculty. And so as we think about how to create inclusive learning experiences that will honor this diversity of our students, we want to think about what structures are out there that can already help us to navigate this. And so I want to give it just a couple minutes to clarify some terms that some of which many of you are probably already familiar with, which includes universal design for learning and inclusive course design, and talk about where those concepts are the same and where they're different. They're often used interchangeably, but they're not actually the same thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean as I'm using these terms. And these terms are also often used in contrast with inclusive teaching and inclusive pedagogy. Now, I'm drawing a distinction here between UDL and course design, and then on one side inclusive teaching and pedagogy on another side. I want to think about what we can do sort of upfront on the course design side of things, as opposed to more specifically about what's happening within the classroom where our teachers are actually teaching. So I want to just frame a little bit about what I'm talking about here. Okay, so universal design for learning. And again, my slides are not advancing. So universal design for learning as a concept emerged from architecture. It's borrowed from architecture, where it refers to the goal of designing the built environment in a way that it will be usable to the widest range of people, regardless of age or ability or status. And the most common example of this that's given is sidewalk cutouts, where they're really useful for people if they're in a wheelchair to be able to navigate the sidewalk, but they're useful for more than just people who are in wheelchairs, right? They're also useful for people who are pushing strollers, or people who are on bicycles, or people who are maybe moving a suitcase. So there's a wide range of other people who were not necessarily in mind, who are helped by this design. Universal design for learning as a mode emphasizes removing barriers to participation. And the goal is to have a course design that provides the greatest degree of access and usability for the most number of people. But at the end of the day, it's a single design that's intended to work for everyone, or really almost everyone. Many of you are probably familiar with a version of this slide. This is a version of the UDL framework, the Universal Design for Learning framework, which works to actively address both learner variability and reducing barriers to learning. It provides guidance about how to do this through multiple means of engagement, through multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression, often what's considered to be the why of learning, or the what of learning, or the how of learning. I'm not going to go into much detail here because I just want to sort of bring this to the forefront. You may have seen this as UDL, and this is developed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, which is responsible for what we understand today as the Universal Design for Learning framework. In contrast, inclusive course design emerged from the digital environment rather than the built environment. So whereas Universal Design for Learning works off of the architectural model, inclusive course design really works from a digital first model that is intentionally welcoming of the full range of human diversity and experience without the need for accommodation. Inclusive course design from the ground up is really intended to help address complex intersectional needs, perspectives, and behaviors without asking people to conform to a single thing. In a digital environment, you have not just one instance of something, but you have potentially any number of it. And in this sense, inclusive course design is intended to provide a flexible, iterative design as opposed to a single static design. So inclusive course design is a course design that intentionally cultivates a more equitable and inclusive learning experience. So this is the definition of inclusive course design that I like, and one that I'm building on here in what I'm going to be talking about. So it works also to reduce barriers to learning, because as we discussed earlier about the variety of barriers that exist, not all students who need accommodations will have them, especially in the current moment, especially where students are continuing to navigate this multi-year traumatic experience, and many of them who don't necessarily know what that traumatic experience means to them. So inclusive course design is intended to make it easier, not harder, for people to participate. And we're going to talk about some strategies for how to do that in just a moment. So some considerations for inclusive course design. While the multiple means of engagement, representation, and action are excellent and really useful guidelines for developing course content and learning activities, there are other factors to consider when developing inclusive courses. And so that's what I want to think about now. And I want to focus on 4 particular areas for inclusive course design. As instructional designers and educators, we can either influence or establish these designs that will intentionally foster inclusivity and reduce barriers for participation. And these include course policies, course materials, activities and assessments, and technology use. So I'm going to briefly describe these, and then I'll give you a brief overview of how we put this into practice in one of our courses. So with course policies, I want to emphasize that course policies can be constructed with both flexibility and the learning process in mind. And so in terms of flexibility, I mean really incorporating flexibility into deadlines and policies around attendance and participation, being as flexible as possible there when it's possible and when it makes sense. And taking into consideration an understanding of the learning process means approaching it from a growth mindset perspective and really normalizing struggle as part of learning. And with normalizing struggle as a part of learning, what that can mean is providing students with activities and assessments that will not penalize them when their work demonstrates that struggle. So that is one of the things that I want to put out there as something to consider. In terms of course materials, faculty can choose to make courses accessible and inclusive or not through the course materials that they use. A traditional understanding of accessibility in terms of course materials often means captions or transcript or alt images or alt text for images, but that's really not going far enough, I don't think. It should include providing access to course materials through the LMS so that students can have immediate and ready access to those materials without having to find them. So they have access to those materials wherever they are, even if they have to suddenly go home in the middle of spring break when they don't have their course books with them. It involves selecting materials that will be low or no cost for students, so that students who have financial constraints, which quite frankly is almost all of our students these days, right? So that they'll be able to access the materials and they're not trying to complete coursework without having access to the readings. It involves chunking materials appropriately to help reduce cognitive load, and it includes including culturally relevant examples and case studies for students to work with. And above all, it also involves making content available asynchronously so that students can really readily and easily return to those materials at their own pace when they need to. In terms of activities and assessments, there's a wide opportunity here for thinking about how to develop a course inclusively in terms of activities and assessments. This can include offering students a choice in assessments, which is one of the strategies that I often advocate for our faculty. It involves providing examples of really successful student projects that students have a sense of what it is that they're working towards. So they have a sense of what faculty members' expectations are for how they'll be evaluated. It involves incorporating reflection into the learning process, and it may also involve using active learning strategies or group work that will help students build connections to their peers and offer them with the opportunity to have an audience for their work that is more than just their faculty member. And if group work is being used, an important factor there can also include how those groups get formed. Groups can be formed in a way, faculty members can make decisions about how to form groups in a way that will foster a sense of belonging, as opposed to highlight for a student or emphasize for a student ways in which they are not like their peers, or where they are the last person who gets chosen for a team gym class in elementary school, right? Like there are things that there are ways in which any of these kinds of activities can be framed to help promote a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion. And then also planning into those course activities, opportunities for feedback. Opportunities for feedback are essential, and feedback should be built into courses as much as possible. Feedback from peers, feedback to oneself through self-assessment and reflection, and also feedback to faculty. And then finally, the last one that I want to talk about here is technology use. More technology is not always better, right? Like I think we all know this. Making judicious use of technology to not overwhelm students, to not excessively burden them in terms of their cognitive load, and making sure that you've got classroom policies that are thoughtful and intentional and student-centered. So thinking through things like, are you allowing or disallowing the use of technology in the classroom? And if so, why? Is there a good reason for it? I've frequently find myself in discussions with faculty members trying to discourage them from preventing students from using the technology that is going to help them perform best in the classroom. So being more open about these policies is really important. And then finally, thinking through the way that an LMS is used. Using an LMS to provide grades and timely feedback to students is really key, but also thinking about how both grades and learning activities are configured within the LMS. Most LMSs have a wide range of options that are available to either make things more inclusive or less inclusive through the ability to close assignments or leave them open to allow students to make up missed work. So there's a lot of choices around here that can be made that can help to make a course either more or less inclusive. And then just remembering that all of this is iterative. And at the end of the semester, or as the semester is going on, considering what's worked and what hasn't and what changes you want to make for the future. So I want to briefly talk about how we implemented some of these in Wharton 101, which is the course that all first year students at Wharton take. It is framed as the first step in their leadership journey, and it's the course that they take during fall semester, their first year at Wharton. This is a course that is part of a new undergraduate curriculum in 2017 at Wharton. It is a half-credit course that students take in the fall. They take it on a pass-fail basis, and they have to complete all of the work for the course. There are about 650 students in total who take it across 12 sections, and the course is team taught by Anne Greenhall, Scott Romika, and the Vice Dean for the Wharton Undergraduate Division, who is currently Diana Roberts. The course is supported by a fleet of 36 TAs who are each responsible for 2 groups of 10 students and additional administrative support. So there's a lot of resources here to help make this be a successful course. The course is designed, I worked really closely with the teaching team to develop this course, and it was designed from the beginning to be inclusive and successful for as many learners as possible. The course has 2 sort of tracks of content. One is weekly asynchronous lectures, which are about one of the 10 departments in the Wharton School that cover business pathways to give students an introduction to what they can do with a career in business. And then there are also synchronous class meetings that also take place each week that help to address students' personal and leadership development. So students are sort of working along the sort of introduction to business education and introduction to leadership skills. Over the course of the semester, they work both individually and in groups, max of 10 students, on a semester-long project where they're working with an outside organization. The students have to complete all of the coursework in order to pass. This includes frequent low stakes assignments that are graded primarily on completion. They get ready, timely feedback from the faculty, from the TAs, and also from their peers throughout the process. And topics on the personal development side do include things like growth mindset and personal development, and emphasize the collaborative skills that are necessary to work in a team. Attendance in the course is required, but there are built-in ways for students to make that up if they miss class. The class meets in a SAIL classroom, that's a structured, active, in-class learning classroom, and hybrid instruction. So students is available to students as needed if they're not able to attend class. So we worked out details the summer before this class launched this year for how to make that happen in a post-pandemic semester. So students have to do everything, but they have the opportunity to make up any work that's missed. So although deadlines are set in the LMS, those deadlines are not enforced. Students are not prevented from turning work in late. So the dates and the due dates in the LMS are really intended to help keep students on track, but they have the opportunity to make them up. Asynchronous lectures are kept open until all students complete the work. So there are still actually a few students who are completing the work from the fall semester still right now. And the synchronous classes, if they miss those synchronous class meetings, there are ways in which they can make those up as well. And we use the Canvas mastery paths as a way to automatically open up a makeup assignment for students who end up being absent in class. So there are no missed learning opportunities. In terms of course materials, all the materials are provided to students at no cost. Most of the readings are provided through electronic reserves or our instructor-generated materials. Everything is provided through the LMS. We use Canvas and electronic course reserves for this. Everything is recorded. All of the class meetings are recorded, and all of the recordings are made available to all students without any restrictions on those. All the asynchronous videos are professionally captioned, and all the classroom lecture capture videos have machine generated captions, but we make sure that everything is captioned. And then students are provided with a lot of models and templates for both their individual and group projects. They have a lot of learning activities over the course of the semester, but I want to focus a little bit on the group work that they do. Groups are planned at the start of the semester, and they're designed for diversity so that students will be working with with people who are from a different part of the country or a different part of the world than they are. There's a gender balance that is aimed for in those groups as well. The groups are allowed to select projects that interest them, and they do group work in every single class. So these skills are really emphasized. They have opportunities to practice and to improve what they do. So bearing in mind that perfection is not expected from the beginning of them. These are first year students, and so they're given ample opportunities to develop their skills and to demonstrate this improvement without any kind of penalty for that. And then they have frequent opportunities for both reflection and feedback from their peers about themselves, from their faculty members. And then in terms of technology use, we've tried to be really careful about the technologies that we select. We use technologies that are well used across both Wharton and the rest of the University of Pennsylvania. The classes are held in a SAIL classroom. Grades and feedback are returned through the learning management system. Students are allowed to use their devices in class. And at each stage, we match the settings that we select for activities and assessments with what is needed for those courses, for that learning activity, and also for the course policies overall. And the results of this are pretty great. It's a significant learning experience for students. They have every opportunity to pass. Students are allowed to complete late work, and which means that very, very, very few students fail. but even then, even with all of this success, one of the things that we do is we always look for opportunities to how to improve upon what's worked and how to refine places where there've been a little bit of friction. And so we're already planning for what's going to change in the fall to make things a little bit easier for everyone. So we've been really happy with how this has worked overall. And I want to build upon this discussion to have you, with the time that we have left, to have you collaboratively generate some ideas about what strategies, what might make a class more inclusive in terms of course policies, course materials, activities and assessments, technology use, and other suggestions that might not readily fit into one of these categories. And if you go back to, I'm going to put the link to this back in chat so that you can readily access this. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it a little bit more easily on screen. But I'm going to ask you to, so I see that some of you identified some barriers to learning, which is really great. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start putting in some suggestions here. And I'd like to, I'd invite you to add suggestions to this Google Doc and or add them into the chat, or unmute yourself and share them here if you think you've got a really excellent idea that you want to talk through, or if you have any questions about any of this. I see that there are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, and I'll try to address those right now. So Eileen asks, how many credits? The credits, it's a half credit course. So at Penn, what would typically be a 3 or a 4 credit course at another university is a 1 credit unit course. This is a half credit unit course. So it would be the equivalent of a 1.5 or a 2 credit course, depending on whether 3 or 4 credit unit courses are the norm at your institution. It's an excellent question. Does anyone, we've got about 5 minutes left. And again, I'm sorry about all of the kitten drama that caused so much, so many problems earlier. But if you have any questions, any other questions about this, I'm happy to respond. But and if not, let's take a look at some of the ideas that you're suggesting in this Google Doc. I love the idea of due dates as recommendations without having absolute deadlines. Now, I want to acknowledge that's not always possible, right? In a world where where 70% of higher education faculty members are in contingent positions, especially adjuncts who may be working at multiple institutions, ultimate flexibility is not always possible, and on the student side is not necessarily desired. Students need some guardrails to help keep them on track, but being as flexible as possible where it's possible, I think, is really important to allow students to put their energies into those assignments that can't be put off till next week, right? Like if an exam is given on one day and you have to take the exam, that being flexible in deadlines can allow students to prioritize their work in ways that can be really essential to their success. I also appreciate someone who said that framing grammar and academic style is contextual and not neutral knowledge. That I think is really, really essential. Like that is one of the things that we're often teaching students as part of the content of our courses, right? We are teaching them how to be students in particular disciplines. And that stuff is absolutely not neutral. And it's also not necessarily a given. Ensuring the accessibility or the availability of electronic versions of required textbooks and open educational resources where possible, I think is a really great suggestion. In classes that I teach, I had to give up certain books that I loved using because they're not available in ebook form. And for me, for the folklore courses that I teach, I couldn't justify teaching an online course and not having a book that was available in an electronic form. And so I think that that is a really, really, really good suggestion. Certainly making sure that all of your PDFs have optical character recognition so that they become searchable is also important. Project and assignment due dates that are flexible is important. Being flexible about I think that means being flexible about the format. That I think is one of the strategies that I love doing in my own classes. In upper level classes that I teach, I let students, they have to do a significant research project, and that research project can take the form of a paper if that's what they want to do, or it can take the form of a creative project or an infographic or a wide range of other forms, and those have been really, really fabulous. So thinking about scaffolding, thinking about many of these other suggestions, you guys are making some really, really wonderful suggestions in this collaborative notes document, and I very much appreciate it. We are just about out of time. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions, or just want to see pictures of kittens. I'm also good for that too. I will share links to this document and also my slide deck in Discord. If you are not on the Discord and but want to make sure that you're able to get that, please reach out to me via email, and I'm putting my my email address in the chat again for you to get that. And Eileen asks, can I put the links and email into this document? Absolutely, I will definitely do that as well. So give me like 15 or 20 minutes and this will be updated, and these resources will also be shared in Discord. So I want to thank you all again for your patience with my unexpected technical snafus earlier, and I hope that you have a great last day tomorrow at this really fabulous conference.
Thank you very much.